So welcome everyone to another prophetic imagination gathering, and thank you all for being here this evening. We are continuing our conversation. Okay, she can't make the whole thing. Well, we're glad you're here for the time you can be here. So this is a continuation of the conversation on extension of care in the age of Black Lives Matter. And in the first session, we learned the self, to admit somebody at the same time, SELF model of care from Reverend Dr. Danielle Burhuro, is that how you pronounce her name? And witnessed a meaningful conversation between Dr. Burhuro and two Alliance pastors, Reverend Mia McLean, who is now senior pastor of Riverside Baptist Church in DC, and Reverend Ryan Price, senior pastor of Broadway Baptist Church in Fort Worth. And tonight, we're going to learn from another great Alliance pastor, Reverend Tara Gibbs. Reverend Tara will then lead us into, after she gives her presentation, we'll break into small groups. And I put questions in the chat that your small group will need to wrestle with. And then we'll come back and just report out one significant concept that really hit home. And as you know, for these gatherings, the idea is never to saturate you with information. It's really just for motivation and reflection and action. So now I will give the formal introduction of Reverend Tara S. Gibbs. She's Associate Minister of Spiritual Formation at Myers Park Baptist Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. She's originally from New Bern, North Carolina, and holds an undergraduate degree from UNC Chapel Hill and graduate degrees from Shaw University and Princeton Theological Seminary. Currently, Tara is pursuing a doctorate of educational ministry at Columbia Theological and plans to continue researching the lack of accessible and updated Christian curriculum for churches. Yay, that's terrific. Since being licensed in 2010, she has preached for numerous conferences, special church services, state Baptist Association sessions, and she's also taught and guest lectured at local universities, including the University of Wisconsin at Madison and the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, typically focusing on womanist spirituality. Outside of her studies and clergy work, Tara has partnered with education nonprofits. She mentors in local schools and volunteers with medical facilities for reproductive rights. She's also been fortunate to study abroad in Spain, Portugal, Morocco, and Mexico. And I'll put her website link in the chat if you want to learn more about Reverend Tara, but I will now turn it over. Tara, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Christy. One quick correction on that is my name is Tara.
Tara, I'm so sorry. I wish that had come out in our original thing.
It's no worries. I remind people all the time that, trust me, it's been here my whole life. I have good friends and even another church member now, same spelling. It's Tara. We laugh about it every time. So it's
okay, good. Well, thank you.
But thank you for that warm introduction, and welcome everyone to another opportunity to listen, learn, and chat together as we continue this great work that the Alliance has been putting forth when it comes to a really strong focus on racism in particular. But through this Thrive Opportunities and this Prophetic Imagination series, which I'm really excited about. So thank you all for being here, and let's just jump right into a few things, shall we? All right, fingers crossed that technology is still our friends. I'm putting some slides, yay. All right, hopefully you can see that. Okay, I've done my best. I know Zoom sometimes defaults to taking up a good chunk of the right-hand side of the screen. You are not missing anything right now. If that is blocked out, just other than maybe my left eyeball, you are just fine, okay? But I've done my best to shift everything over, so hopefully it is clear to see. And if at any point, I know that this is being recorded for those who cannot attend in person, hello, I am happy to send out these slides that you might be able to review in your own time. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll note as well that I was able to catch some of the last presentation, so you may hear a little bit of overlap, but that just means that we're all on board and on the same page. Nothing wrong with that. All right. All right. Now, I just gave you praise, technology. Don't embarrass me in front of my friends. Okay. So the first question that I would just love everyone to kind of think about as we jump into this conversation is, really easy and simple. There are a few images I'm going to put before you, and I just want you to take a moment and look at each of these images and think how, in some way, one of these three images might depict or demonstrate this idea of care and concern for our context and our congregations. What about these images really speak to us when we think about care and concern? Okay, so let me give you just a second for personal thought there. Okay. And to be respectful of time, we'll move on a little bit, but normally I would break down and have some deeper discussion about each of these images, because I think they all have some pros, but they also have some cons when we start thinking about care and concern. For example, the first image really has a central focus on a central and one particular individual. In some ways, there are some pros and some strengths being able to look to one or maybe very few individuals for our care and concern when it comes to responsibility. But then we have to look at the cons as well, that when that weight is on one individual or a few individuals, notice that that person is lifted up, right? And what are some of the dangers that can arise out of that kind of model? The second image in the center of your screen, beautiful imagery of appears to be a woman watering some greenery. Beautiful imagery when it comes to care and concern, when we think about nurturing, when we think about gardening, right? And creation care, if you will. Some of the cons may be, what exactly is she watering, right? In some ways, is this some kind of plant for some kind of use, or is this, are these weeds, right? How did they get this tall? What about the pruning process? We can go on and on about all kinds of pros, all kinds of cons there. And the last image is one that reminds me of an older phrase, lifting as we climb, right? Seems to be a mountaintop image or a rugged cliff. There's one person that already appears to be at the top and reaching down to help someone else. Again, beautiful prose here about this idea of care and concern and what it means to reach down and lift up. But there may be some cons too. These questions of what exactly excelled one person to get to the top before someone else? What are the dangers? If we look at it a little more literally here or explicitly, excuse me, if this person grabs their hand, I don't really feel like they're supportive enough to be able to pull them up, right? What are the dangers? We could accidentally pull someone else down in the process of intending to pull up. So none of these pictures, the point is, none of these pictures may not fully grasp what it is we're trying to do when we think about care and concern, particularly in our congregational context. Doesn't mean they're not useful, but they're not helpful. But I put them before you right now, and that we can start to think of the ways we already assume care and concern work for congregations, particularly in the age of Black Lives Matter, but also to help and challenge us a little bit deeper in our imaginations of what care and concern looks like. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through today. All right, so what I would like to put forth is not a picture, but a model. I have a model that I believe gives us some practical kind of steps when we think about care and concern in the age of Black Lives Matter. And that model really doesn't have a fancy name. I just call it an advocacy model, okay? So advocacy as in going beyond. It's so easy to see the need for care and concern when we think about diversity, right? But we want to go beyond just being diverse. We want to go beyond not being racist, right? We want to go beyond even allyship, which can be a tricky one for us because allyship is becoming a little bit of a buzzword. None of these things are inherently bad or wrong, but our challenge today is how can we go beyond? As Christy mentioned a little bit in the introduction, is that again, the Alliance has been doing this work for some time. The Thriving Congregations is intended to take a few years. And so how can we challenge ourselves to not get stuck at what we would call maybe surface level diversity, not being racist, or allyship, and going a little bit deeper now as we start to think about advocacy as our primary model of care and concern. So here's a phrase, this last one on the slide, wait a little longer. When we think about this kind of work, this phrase comes up a little too often for my liking. This idea of waiting and we'll get there and it takes time and they're not ready. My response to that is always, we'll get them ready. What are we doing to get them ready, right? And I was particularly struck very recently by a commentary from Reverend Larissa Kwong Abaiza, and I hope I pronounced her last name correctly. And I want to read just a piece of this passage of a commentary she had in response to this phrase, wait a little longer. She also reflected a little bit about a particular, and maybe familiar for many of you, parable found in the Gospel of Luke that is around the gardener finding a fig tree in the middle of a vineyard, and that fig tree is not producing. The fig tree in the middle of his vineyard is not producing, okay? So here's what she says. As a person of color, I hear these comments on a regular basis that wait a little longer, right? On my best days, this commentary ignites a fire to change the systems and structures that regularly oppress marginalized people. Other times I wonder, am I being pacified just enough to stick around? The first thing I want to know is why a fig tree is in the midst of a vineyard. The tree would not be a primary focus in a field cultivating grapes, apparently planted so that no inch of the ground is squandered. Many of us experience the world as a fig tree in the midst of grapevines. We are placed in fields not meant for us and yet expected to thrive. People discount and doubt us, threatening to cut us down if we don't produce in the ways that have been defined on our behalf. We are afterthoughts, demanded to bear fruit or be destroyed. Again, this comes from Reverend Larissa Kwong Abaiza, who wrote this commentary as a part of the Full to the Brim curriculum for an expansive Lent in 2023. I advise anyone to get a copy of it. It is phenomenal. But I hope this kind of gives us a little bit of centering and remembering what it means to keep doing this work. And hopefully you'll see in just a moment why I'm advocating for this advocacy model to keep us pushing, going beyond diversity, but beyond not being racist and beyond allyship, that maybe, just maybe, we can reach out to those who are experiencing this world as fig trees in the midst of a vineyard, not expected to thrive and can still find some thriving, okay? All right, so here's what we'll kind of do today. For those people who are like, all right, but what are you gonna do? Let's hit it. First, I wanna just touch on context because context is always key. I'll give you a dab of theology for those people who are like, you know, those liberals, those progressives, they are so afraid to talk about the Bible. So a little bit of the why from a theological point, and then we're gonna jump right into the how-to. Would love to have more time to get into all of this, but I'll have to just give you the shortest version I can of each one, all right? So let's dig a little bit into context and call a thing a thing. Historically, churches have provided very limited opportunities for anti-racist work. And that comes down to a few things. One, a history of bigotry. Let's not forget that for many churches, particularly in the South, it was not uncommon in the 19th century to go to Sunday worship, have a good time, praise the Lord, hear scripture, talking about loving your neighbor, and immediately go grab lunch, maybe a sandwich, a few drinks, and go to the park for a lynching, okay? These were good Christian church folk who were involved in such heinous and horrific acts. So the church has to be honest about this history and be forthright in the roles that we have played, whether that was explicit or sins of, we might say, commission, things we did, and sins of omission, the times we didn't say anything when we should have. The second is, of course, present discrimination, the idea that racism is over, right? That these things don't happen anymore. Maybe not in the same forms, but still ever present. And the things that we still, in the ways we still discriminate against people today. And an ongoing passiveness around whiteness. This comes out in ways of micro and macro aggressions, right? And the systems that we are afraid to challenge, because the idea of even challenging systems as they are is upholding whiteness and upholding that structure, okay? Let me stop here just to check in. Do we have any burning questions? I was gonna wait to the end, but I wanna make sure there are no burning questions. If you could, you're welcome to unmute and just ask any questions. All right.
Reverend Tara.
Yeah, go for it.
You give a chance. I missed the person who, the quote you gave us about the fig tree. If you have a chance to type it up and put it in the chat at some point, or yeah. I would love to follow up on that.
I'm happy to do that. And I wish I could do it now, but I don't see how to while I'm sharing this screen.
Yeah, busy.
But I am happy to give credit where credit is due. So yes, remind me near the end if I forget. I'm happy to type that once I stop sharing. Thank you. Okay. All right, let's move on, and I'll give another opportunity for questions in just a moment. Thanks, Mark. Okay. All right. So I like to call this the theology behind, underneath, and beside, because in many ways, theology doesn't just undergird the things that we do. It doesn't just loom over. It's not just within, it's all around, if we're being honest, right? If we think about the literal meaning of theology, the ideas we have of the divine, right? What is it we think and believe of the divine is literal theology. And so I put for you two scriptures that you may want to reread in your personal time, very familiar scriptures, but I hope that they will speak to you a little bit differently the next time you see them in this idea of moving towards advocacy and our practical ways of doing anti-racist work within church context. The first can be found in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 5, verses 21 to 34. When you look it up, you're like, oh yeah, this is the story of the woman with the issue of blood, right? Very familiar text. She's been hemorrhaging perhaps for 12-ish years, seen many kind of doctors, has to go to touch the hem of Jesus's garment to go for the healing. The part that people forget is that her story is situated within another story. That other story is a story of another healing, and that is the healing of Jairus's daughter. And so one way that we can really look at this text when it relates to advocacy in both stories is to compare the women and their experiences of needing healing, right? We have one woman who's been a grown woman who has been in pain for years. She has some story that we may not know of her. We don't even know her name. We don't know her connection. And then we have Jairus's daughter, who is the daughter of a well-known, wealthy individual, right? We don't know her name either, but misogyny. What are you going to do about it? At least we know who she's connected to. We know her family. You have, on the other hand, this grown woman, okay, who has looked for years for healing. She's trying to find out what it is she needs. We don't have any sense of her having anyone to speak up on her behalf. In fact, it says she has to push through the crowds to reach Jesus. Meanwhile, Jairus's daughter is never on the scene because Jairus is able to send a servant to go to Jesus. They never leave the house. They're in the comforts of their home, right? Seeking Jesus for healing, trusting that the servant is going to handle what needs to be handled and that they'll get what they need in their place of safety. This woman with the issue of blood has to fight through the crowds to get to Jesus and is reprimanded versus Jairus's daughter's servant who was able to request, can you come over here? Actually, we just need you to come over here. This is why I was sent to come and get you, right? There is no hope that that we can reach Jesus. Jesus is just called upon and expected to respond, right? So why contrast these two women, or this girl and this woman? Because at the end of the day, they both get to Jesus. They both get healed. But what does it mean where one has been suffering for years and has to fight to get that healing, is reprimanded for having the audacity to touch the hem of Jesus' garment, to push through the crowds, and another has what we might call the privilege of just waiting for this healing to come to her? Where might we find ourselves in this text? Where might we find ourselves? Have we found ourselves acting on behalf of others in the role of that servant, going out and finding healing and bringing it to the person in need? Or are we the crowds around the woman with the issue of blood, causing restriction, causing her to hold back, saying, just wait a little bit longer. You waited 12 years, you can wait a little bit longer. And then once she makes her own way and pushes through, to have the audacity to say, how dare you? What do you think you're doing? So where might we find ourselves when we think about advocacy? Which story represents advocacy for us? Okay. The second story I bring to your attention is one I shared with Dr. Reverend Abaya's commentary about the fig tree in the vineyard. That can be found in Luke's Gospel, the 13th chapter, verses 6-9, where again, there is a fig tree that is mysteriously in the middle of a grape vineyard. Why there? Unsure. And then the expectation that this tree, planted where it really shouldn't have been in the first place, where it didn't have the resources it needed, where it didn't have anything around it that also resembled a fig tree, where nothing around it looked like it or grew like it or had the same experiences, was expected to thrive. What might it mean when we look at our marginalized community groups and expect them to thrive in a place where there are no resources, where the location was not even built with them in mind, right? What might it mean when they see themselves as fig trees in a vineyard? Then a gardener comes along and says, they're not producing. Cut them down. They're a waste. They're not bearing fruit. What questions might come up when we wonder, instead of bearing fruit, what if this fig tree is also providing shade and providing oxygen and providing a home for insects as well as birds that this entire ecosystem can flourish? It's not doing it the way you thought it would contribute, that you put it in here to contribute to this garden, but it's still worthy. It's still contributing. And the other gardener comes in and says, give us time. I need to dig more around it. I need to put more manure. I need to nurture this fig tree, and it will do what it needs to do. So where do you see advocacy here in that story? Okay. All right, I could preach on these all day, but I'm not gonna do all that. Let's move on. So here's your theological behind, underneath, beside when we think about advocacy work. Now it's time to get into the nitty-gritty. How do we do this? Okay, how do we use this advocacy when we think of anti-racist work, particularly in our congregations? I like this cat because this cat brings me joy, and it's running as fast as it can. So the model I came up with is what I just call the ASAP model. We've got to get on this quickly. There is no wait and see, right? This is the model we have. It's ASAP. Now I heard Dr. Danielle mention that her self model was already copyrighted, so you couldn't use that. This isn't copyrighted yet, but if you use it, I'm just going to call you racist. Okay, so don't steal it from me yet. I'm working on it. Okay, give me some time. Wait a little while. I'm sorry, I can't be serious for about 5 minutes. All right, so this ASAP model, ASAP, what does that stand for? Thank you for asking. ASAP. So the first A in ASAP is very simple, analysis. We like to skip this part because it seems so to the point, on the nose, like, duh, we know this, but we don't do it well, let's be honest, because we really do need to stop and do those basic analyses of what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, what are our needs, and what are our wants. In church context and congregational context, that means we need to wrestle with and be honest with our own individual context, history, our present, and our goals. So what has been going on, what is going on, and what would we like to go on, okay? So if we're going to continue to do this anti-racist work, if we're going to provide care and concern for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, what does it mean to do an analysis and look at the history of our particular context when it comes to providing care, okay? What are we doing in the present? And what are our goals for what we want this to look like? Again, seems very straightforward, but if we don't take the time to stop and actually do this, we don't have a plan, right? So very simple. Analysis is the first step in this. And what you'll see in a moment is that this steps, you can go in order, but it's actually going to end up being cyclical. We have to keep going around it. And you'll see that in just a second. So analyze, what are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are our needs? What are our wants? And you'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit in the small groups, okay? Asking that question instead of who am I, who are we? What is this place? What have we done? What are we doing? What do we want to do in the future? Okay. All right. I'm on PowerPoint. All right. The S in ASAP. After you've done your analysis work, then it's time to get into the support. Here's the part that people forget. Support and care start before a single Black, Indigenous person of color steps foot inside. It starts before they're even there. You have to start asking questions on the individual and the organizational level. What things are we doing to support before someone's even here? What systems are in place already? And what do we need to have in place, right? How have I as an individual shown my support, okay? What do I mean by support? I mean affirming and applauding, being there, offering encouraging words, affirming who someone is and who they are, not just what they produce, right? But who they already are. And I always say clear messaging, very clear. I love churchclarity.org and their work where they say that ambiguity is dangerous. It's dangerous. And for people of color, Black, Indigenous people of color, when we look at churches in particular, let's be honest, when we analyze the history of many churches, those have not been safe places, right? And I'm speaking on that as myself as a queer woman too. Churches are not the default place I think of as, gosh, that's just going to be safe and I'm going to be loved for who I am. So we have to be clear, because let's be honest, what church is not going to say they're not welcoming? What church is going to say, oh no, our people are mean, we're not nice, right? Every single church you can look up is going to say, we welcome everyone, we love all people, we want you here. That's great messaging. It's not clear messaging. Clear messaging is when I drive by churches that say all Black Lives Matter. That's making a very clear statement to me. Okay. When I go on the website, what kind of messaging is there? That is clear messaging. Statements about the church beliefs. That's one of the first things I look at on our church website is where's that our faith statements? What is it? Our beliefs, right? And many churches will opt to the, we're nice people, we're nice folk, we're just following Jesus. Beautiful. It's not very clear, because those same people have very different views of Jesus than I do. Okay. Clear, very clear messaging. The Christian educator in me loves to bring up about this when it comes to education too. There is a difference in what we're teaching and saying, because everything we do teaches and says something, right? So you have your explicit curriculum, right? Those are the things that the stuff you purchase to use with like your youth group or your vacation Bible school, the devotionals you may purchase for your small groups, the sermons you hear on a Sunday morning. That's explicitly what you're hoping, maybe your new member book, right? Or packet. That's the things explicitly you want your people to know. Beautiful. But then there's a second level, and that's called the implicit curriculum. That's the things that's not really written down, but we expect you to pick it up at some point. So no, we don't walk during the prayer, right? That you learn that implicitly when ushers start to say, hold on a second, right? We learn that implicitly when we start to look around and say, this place really cares about their history, because all I see are black and white photos, right? We take it to another level. This church really cares about their facility because everything is maintained beautifully, right? And that can be good or bad, right? Do they maintain the facility to the expense of not doing outreach work, right? These bushes and this brick and everything else, all very beautifully maintained. How much are you giving to the community though? Because this cannot be cheap. It's not cheap to mow this lawn, right? So what are you implicitly teaching and showing? What are you implicitly showing where every picture of every face in the church is a white face? Here are our leaders, here are our pastors. White male, white male, white male, right? That's your history. No denying that, nothing wrong with that. But it's implicitly teaching a message that says this is who's worthy of being our leaders. Okay. Or even white Jesus. My good, I got stories about that. You're looking up and seeing a depiction of Jesus in the very blonde hair, blue-eyed, non-Mediterranean looking Jesus, non-Middle Eastern looking Jesus. Okay, it's teaching something implicitly. No one says it. No one's writing these things out and teaching it in Sunday school, but it's there. Okay. Then there's the null curriculum, N-U-L-L, null. What are the things we're not even saying, that we're explicitly not touching? What are the topics we're afraid to say? Are we afraid to say the word whiteness? Are we afraid to say the word white supremacy? Are we afraid to say these words because it might hurt feelings? Right? All this ties into the clear messaging and lets people know where you stand when it comes to support. All that got a little bit off of the tangent, but things happen about clear messaging. And all that falls under support. Right? So we've analyzed, we've supported. I got 2 more letters and I'll be out your way. The second part of the the third part of the ASAP model, I want you to look at this baby. If you can see your screens, there's this baby that looks like my God baby. Look at this baby. All right. This baby has a green block. That's not working. Keep trying. Nope. Forced it. Bam. Look at that. Made it work. Now, why would you show this little video, Tara? Well, one, it's cute, and cute things don't hurt anybody. But the second A and the third letter in the ASAP model is explicitly advocacy. And when I say advocacy, even a part of this advocacy model, because I couldn't think of a better word, it literally is making room and presenting opportunities, right? So that baby tried to fit something in that wasn't going to fit. And we know the lesson and what's supposed to be teaching the baby about motor skills and cognitive skills and things is it needs to go where it fits. But this baby said, well, I can think outside that box and I'm going to make it work regardless, right? It's cute, but we struggle with that as adults, if we're being honest. And we struggle with the idea of going outside what we said is the rules. There are adults that would have watched and played with that baby and would have said, no, 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 don't do it like that. Don't do it like that. It needs to go here. But the goal was still reached. That block was inside the bucket. It didn't happen the way we wanted it to. That's not the way we would have played with it, right? But when we think outside the box and we make room and we present opportunities, this is where you put your money where your mouth is. This is where we have to say, when we have power and privilege in certain places, to say, you know what, thank you for offering me the opportunity, but I'm actually going to suggest that you go to my colleague here, right, who might be a better fit to talk about this issue. For example, if it's about racism, and if I'm white, and I might say, you know what, actually, I would love you to actually invite my colleague here as a person of color. This is a great opportunity for them. Or, I love that you invited my colleague, and I think that they'd be very interested. I hope you're paying them, right? There is no free, let's get a favor. I hope you're paying them. And you should cover the hotel, you should cover the travel, and this, that, and the other. This is the opportunity to make room and present opportunities, which comes with a little bit of self-sacrificing. There are times where when we have places of power and privilege that we need to step down, right? And make room for someone else, okay? So this is where the advocacy really leans in. How are you making room? How are you presenting opportunities, okay? For people who may not look like you, for people who are more marginalized than you, okay? And then lastly, the P in ASAP. It's progress. You got to check in at some point. We can't keep doing this work and not pause for just a moment to check in. And when I say check in, I mean check in on all sides. So if you're on the clergy or staff side of a church, maybe you're involved in the hiring practices, we need to check in on what our bylaws say. We need to check in on what the church covenant says. We need to check in on who people, how the experiences of people we have hired, right? A few months ago, the Alliance checked in with me and did a survey and called me as a Black person in ministry on clergy at a Alliance church and checked in to say, hey, how are things going for you, right? We can list out all the things we've done, but how are things going for you in your experience? That check-in. Then there's also the other check-in. What else do we need to grow? Where else do we need to keep learning? Where else do we need to keep evaluating, right? Where else do we need to change? What needs to adjust in this? That's what connects us back through this progress and this checking in to another analysis. Where are we? Where are we going? What has worked? What hasn't worked? And we go through the steps all over again, from that progress to another analysis, to the support, to the advocacy, to progress, all the way back to analysis again. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. All right. I think I don't remember what time I started, but I feel like this is long enough. So I'd love for any more questions that might have come up for anyone before we break into our small groups to do some intentional questioning and thinking together. Let me stop that. So do we have any questions while I answer in the chat? You can just get on the mic if you'd like, or type in the chat. I'm open to both.
Oh,
all right.
Okay. Thank you. That's the name.
Okay. Thanks, Christy.